Marissa, she has better skills for this kind of thing, my mom said, her voice cutting through the humid Kansas City afternoon like a knife through butter. I sat there at the worn wooden table in the back office of Doyle's family kitchen, staring at my parents while my sister Emily grinned beside them. The restaurant hummed with the lunch rush just beyond the door, a sound I'd grown to love over the past 14 months of rebuilding this place from the ground up. My name is Marissa Doyle. I'm 39 years old, and I had just watched my family hand over everything I'd sacrificed for to my younger sister, without so much as a thank you. The irony wasn't lost on me, that we were sitting in the same booth where I'd presented my business plan to save this restaurant exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 16 days ago. I remembered that day vividly because it was the day I'd signed the papers to sell my house. Emily flipped her perfectly styled blonde hair and leaned back in the booth like she owned the place, which apparently she now did. "Don't worry, Marissa. I'll make sure to keep some of your ideas," she said, with that condescending smile I'd grown up hating. "The social media presence alone is going to transform this place. We need a younger image, you know?" My father nodded enthusiastically, his weathered hands clasped together on the table. "Emily's got all those followers on Instagram. She understands what people want these days." He gestured vaguely toward the dining room where customers were enjoying the farm-to-table menu I'd personally negotiated with 3 local suppliers. "We need someone who can really connect with the community." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "So this is official then? Emily is taking over as manager?" My mother reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a child being told I couldn't have dessert. "Honey, you've done wonderful work getting us back on our feet. But now, we need someone with fresh energy to take us to the next level. Emily has such creative vision." The lunch crowd's chatter filtered through the thin office walls, mixing with the sizzle of the grill and the clatter of dishes. Sounds of the restaurant I'd saved with my own money, my own sweat, my own sleepless nights poring over supplier contracts and health department regulations. But as I looked at my family's expectant faces, I realized something important. They had no idea what was coming next. I thought back to the day I'd first walked into this restaurant as its savior, rather than just another family member. The bills had been stacked on this very table like a paper mountain of despair. Past due notices from the electric company, the gas company, 3 different food suppliers, and the commercial real estate firm that managed our lease. My parents had been talking about bankruptcy, about closing down the restaurant that had been in our family for 28 years. "We just can't keep up anymore," my mother had said that day, her eyes red from crying. "The margins are too thin, the competition is too fierce, and we're hemorrhaging money every month." That's when I'd made the decision that changed everything. I sold my 3-bedroom house in Overland Park, the one I'd bought after my divorce, the one with the garden I'd spent 3 years cultivating and the reading nook where I'd planned to grow old. The sale netted me enough to pay off the restaurant's debts and still have a substantial operating fund left over. But I hadn't just thrown money at the problem. I'd rolled up my sleeves and rebuilt this place from the inside out. I'd spent hours researching local farms, negotiating contracts that cut our food costs by 30% while improving quality. I'd redesigned the menu to highlight seasonal ingredients and eliminate waste. I'd retrained the kitchen staff, implemented new inventory systems, and personally handled the books every single night. The transformation had been remarkable. Within 6 months, we'd gone from losing money to breaking even. By month 10, we were profitable. By month 14, we had a waiting list on weekends, and food bloggers writing reviews about our authentic farm-to-table experience. Emily, meanwhile, had been living her best life in Denver, working as a social media coordinator for some startup that sold overpriced yoga pants online. She'd visited exactly twice during the entire reconstruction period, both times just long enough to post Instagram photos of herself helping the family business, before disappearing back to her apartment. Now, sitting in this meeting, I watched my sister scroll through her phone while my parents outlined their vision for her leadership. She hadn't asked a single question about operations, staffing, or finances. She hadn't inquired about the supplier relationships I'd built, or the seasonal menu planning I'd implemented. Her entire contribution to the conversation had been showing my parents her Instagram follower count and explaining how she could leverage visual storytelling to drive engagement. The most telling moment came when my father mentioned the upcoming health department inspection. Emily looked up from her phone with genuine confusion. "What do we need to do for that?" she asked. I realized in that moment that she had absolutely no idea how to actually run a restaurant. She saw it as a backdrop for content creation, not as the complex business operation it truly was. But I kept my mouth shut and let them talk. After all, they'd made their decision. The meeting dragged on for another hour, with my parents outlining Emily's new responsibilities and her sharing increasingly unrealistic ideas about themed nights and influencer partnerships. I listened to it all with growing amazement at how disconnected they were from the reality of what had actually saved this place. "We should definitely do a TikTok challenge with the signature dish," Emily said, gesturing excitedly. "Maybe something like Doyle's Delight Challenge, where people try to finish our biggest burger in under 5 minutes. My father's eyes lit up. "That sounds fantastic. Marissa, what do you think? Would that work with the kitchen operations?" I almost laughed. The biggest burger on our menu was actually one of our most carefully portioned items, designed to showcase the quality of our local beef without creating waste. Turning it into a speed-eating spectacle went against everything I'd built here. But instead of explaining that, I simply nodded. "Sure, Dad. Emily's the manager now. It's her call." The casual way they dismissed my year of sacrifice became more apparent with each passing minute. When Emily suggested changing suppliers to someone more photogenic, my mother actually nodded approvingly. When she proposed eliminating some of the seasonal menu items because they were too complicated for social media, my father started taking notes. Not once did anyone acknowledge that the suppliers I'd chosen weren't just cost-effective and reliable. They were the reason we'd been featured in Kansas City Magazine as farm-to-table excellence. Not once did anyone mention that the seasonal menu had increased our profit margins by 40% over the previous year. The final straw came when Emily pulled out her phone and started taking selfies at the table. "I need to post about my new position," she said, angling the camera to catch the restaurant's rustic decor in the background. "This is going to be such a great announcement post." She snapped photo after photo, pausing only to check her makeup or adjust her hair. Meanwhile, I could hear the kitchen staff calling out orders and see through the office window that the afternoon rush was picking up. The restaurant I'd saved was bustling with customers, generating revenue, creating jobs for 12 people who depended on this place for their livelihoods. But to Emily, it was just a prop for her personal brand. When she finally finished her impromptu photo shoot, she looked at me with what I supposed was meant to be sisterly compassion. "Don't worry, Marissa. I'll make sure to tag you in some posts. You deserve credit for the foundation work." Foundation work. As if saving the family business from bankruptcy was just laying groundwork for her social media empire. I stood up from the table and gathered my purse. "Well, this has been illuminating," I said, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. "I should probably head out early today. I have some errands to run." My parents smiled and nodded, already turning their attention back to Emily's grand plans. As I walked toward the door, I heard my sister start talking about hiring a professional photographer for the restaurant's Instagram makeover. I stepped outside into the Kansas City heat and pulled out my phone. I had exactly one call to make. The law office of Patricia Hawkins was exactly what I needed. Efficient, professional, and discreet. I'd met Patricia 2 years earlier during my divorce proceedings, and she'd impressed me with her no-nonsense approach to complex situations. When I called her that evening after the family meeting, she'd agreed to see me first thing the next morning. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Patricia said, reviewing the stack of documents I'd brought with me. Her office overlooked downtown Kansas City, and the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in sharp relief. "You sold your personal residence to fund the restaurant's recovery, and all the operational contracts are in your name?" I nodded, watching her flip through the supplier agreements, lease modifications, and financial documents. Every single one: the farm contracts, the specialty ingredient suppliers, the commercial lease renegotiation, the equipment financing, everything. My parents were so overwhelmed by the debt that they gladly let me handle all the paperwork. Patricia's expression grew more intrigued as she continued reading. "And this sister of yours, she has no legal claim to these contracts?" "None whatsoever. Emily wasn't even in the state when I negotiated most of these deals. She's never been an authorized signatory on any business documents." I leaned back in the leather chair, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't experienced since yesterday's meeting. My parents seemed to think that declaring her manager somehow transfers all operational control to her, but legally speaking, she can't actually manage anything without my cooperation. The lawyer set down the documents and looked at me directly. "Marissa, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? Because based on what I'm seeing, you have several options, and some of them are quite decisive." I'd spent most of the previous night thinking about exactly that question. After the shock and anger had worn off, I'd found myself strangely clear-headed about my situation. My family had shown me exactly how much they valued my contributions, and now I needed to decide how to respond. "I want out," I said finally. "I want to extract myself from this situation in a way that protects my interests and teaches them a valuable lesson about business. Emily thinks running a restaurant is about taking pretty pictures and coming up with hashtags. I'd like her to discover what it actually involves." Patricia smiled, not warmly, but with the professional satisfaction of someone who appreciated elegant solutions to complex problems. "In that case, I think we can arrange something quite educational. The question is how quickly you want this to happen and how thoroughly you want to demonstrate your point." We spent the next hour mapping out my options. I could simply withdraw from the contracts gradually, letting Emily slowly discover the scope of her new responsibilities. I could cancel everything immediately, creating an instant crisis that would force my family to confront reality. Or I could take a middle approach, selectively removing my support to create maximum impact with minimal collateral damage to the staff and customers I cared about. "There's also the question of your future plans," Patricia noted. "If you're serious about leaving the family business, you'll need to consider what comes next. Do you want to stay in the restaurant industry?" That question had been lurking in the back of my mind since yesterday. I'd put my heart and soul into saving Doyle's family kitchen, but not just because it was my family's legacy. I'd discovered that I genuinely loved the restaurant business, the creativity of menu development, the satisfaction of operational efficiency, the joy of creating experiences that brought people together over good food. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice, "I think I do, but on my own terms this time." Patricia's smile widened. "In that case, we have some additional options to discuss. And I think your family is about to get a very expensive education in the difference between managing a business and simply working in one." That afternoon, I drove to Raventhorn Studios, a small production company where my friend Bethany worked as a graphic designer. We'd met during my divorce when she'd helped me design marketing materials for my short-lived freelance consulting business, and she'd been one of the few people who truly understood my passion for operational excellence. "You did what?" Bethany nearly choked on her coffee when I finished explaining yesterday's family meeting. We were sitting in the small break room at her office, surrounded by creative chaos. Mood boards, color swatches, and half-finished design concepts scattered across every surface. "They handed the restaurant over to Emily like I was just the cleanup crew," I said, shaking my head at the memory. "She literally took selfies while they were explaining her new responsibilities." Bethany set down her mug and stared at me. "Marissa, you sold your house to save that place. You rebuilt their entire operation from scratch. How can they just—" She stopped herself and took a deep breath. "Okay, never mind how they can do it. The question is what you're going to do about it. I'd been asking myself the same question for the past 24 hours. The legal consultation with Patricia had clarified my options, but I needed someone who understood the emotional complexity of family business dynamics. Bethany had grown up in a family of small business owners, and she'd watched similar dramas play out among her relatives. "I think I'm going to let Emily learn the hard way," I said finally. "And then I'm going to start my own place." Bethany's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? You're going to open your own restaurant?" "A cafe, actually. Something smaller and more manageable." I've been thinking about it all morning, and I realized that what I really loved about rebuilding Doyle's wasn't the family aspect. It was creating something excellent from the ground up. I pulled out my phone and showed her some photos I'd been looking at during lunch. "There's a space available on Main Street, just 3 blocks from the family restaurant. It's smaller, but it has character and excellent foot traffic." We spent the next hour brainstorming concepts. Bethany's creative mind immediately started generating ideas for branding, layout, and marketing strategies. She pulled up demographic data for the area and started sketching potential logo concepts on napkins. "You know what would be brilliant?" she said, her pen moving rapidly across the paper. "If you could somehow bring over the staff from Doyle's. They know your management style, they're trained on your standards, and they'd probably love to work somewhere they're actually appreciated." That thought had occurred to me as well. During my year of rebuilding the family restaurant, I'd developed strong relationships with the kitchen staff and servers. They'd been enthusiastic about the changes I'd implemented, and several had mentioned feeling more motivated and respected under my leadership than they had in years. The timing would have to be perfect, I mused. I'd need to wait until Emily's management style starts creating problems, but not so long that good people find other jobs. Bethany grinned mischievously. "Something tells me Emily's going to create problems pretty quickly, especially once she realizes that managing a restaurant involves more than just posting pictures of food." As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about the future. Instead of feeling trapped by family obligations and expectations, I was starting to see possibilities. Emily wanted to transform Doyle's into her personal social media platform. Fine, she could have it. But she was about to discover that running a restaurant required a lot more than good lighting and clever captions. The next morning, I arrived at Doyle's at my usual time, 6 a.m., 2 hours before we opened for breakfast. The restaurant was quiet except for the gentle hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of early morning traffic on Main Street. I'd always loved this time of day, when the space felt full of potential and the day's possibilities stretched ahead like a blank canvas. Carlos was already in the kitchen, prepping vegetables for the lunch service. He'd been with the restaurant for 6 years, working his way up from dishwasher to sous chef under my guidance. When he saw me come through the back door, his face brightened with relief. "Marissa, thank God you're here," he said, not looking up from the onions he was dicing. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be coming in regular hours now that your sister is supposed to be running things." I tied on my apron and washed my hands at the prep sink. "What makes you think anything's changed?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Word traveled fast in a restaurant kitchen, and Emily's appointment as manager would have been the topic of considerable discussion among the staff. "Well," Carlos said carefully, "Emily came by yesterday evening after you left. She wanted to take some pictures of the kitchen for her Instagram. She kept asking us to pose with different dishes and rearrange things to look more authentic." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice neutral. "How did that go?" "She wanted me to remake the fish special 3 times because the plating wasn't photogenic enough," Carlos continued, his tone growing more frustrated. "And she asked Maria to pretend she was kneading bread dough even though we buy our bread from that artisan bakery you set up the contract with. She said customers want to see the baking process." This was exactly what I'd expected, but hearing it confirmed still made my blood pressure rise. Emily had spent exactly 1 evening as manager and was already undermining the authentic farm-to-table brand I'd worked so hard to establish. "Did she say anything about menu changes?" I asked, beginning my own prep routine for the breakfast service. Carlos exchanged a glance with Maria, who had just arrived and was tying on her server apron. She mentioned something about adding more Instagrammable options, Maria said hesitantly, like rainbow-colored pancakes and those giant milkshakes with candy piled on top. She said we need to appeal to a younger demographic. I nearly laughed out loud. Rainbow pancakes and dessert milkshakes were exactly the opposite of the carefully curated, locally sourced menu that had attracted Kansas City Magazine's attention and built our reputation among serious food enthusiasts. But I simply nodded and continued working. She also wanted to know why we close between lunch and dinner, Carlos added. She said we should stay open all day to maximize revenue opportunities. That comment revealed just how little Emily understood about restaurant operations. We closed between lunch and dinner for a dozen practical reasons: to allow staff breaks, to prep for the evening service, to manage labor costs, and to maintain food quality standards. Staying open all day would require hiring additional staff, increase our ingredient waste, and probably result in serving inferior food during the slow afternoon hours. But instead of explaining any of that, I made a mental note to call Patricia later that morning. Emily was moving even faster than I'd anticipated to implement changes that would undermine everything I'd built, which meant it was time to accelerate my own timeline. Don't worry about any of that right now, I told Carlos and Maria. Let's focus on giving our customers the best possible experience today. The rest will work itself out. As I said those words, I realized I wasn't just reassuring my staff. I was making a promise to myself. Emily wanted to turn Doyle's into a social media playground. She was about to learn that real restaurants required more than pretty pictures to survive. The phone call to Patricia took exactly 12 minutes and changed everything. I want to execute the plan we discussed, I told her from my car in the parking lot behind Doyle's. Emily's already making operational changes that could damage the relationships I've built. I need to protect my interests now. Understood, Patricia replied with professional efficiency. I'll begin the contract termination process immediately. The supplier notifications will go out this afternoon, and the lease modification cancellation will be processed by tomorrow morning. Are you certain about the timeline? I watched through the restaurant's back window as Emily posed for selfies with confused kitchen staff. She was wearing a designer dress completely inappropriate for restaurant work and holding a plate of our signature breakfast sandwich like it was a prop in a photo shoot. I'm certain, I said. And Patricia, I want to sign the lease on that cafe space we discussed. Today, if possible. I'll make the calls. The current owner is motivated to rent quickly, so I expect we can have papers ready by this afternoon. 2 hours later, I stood in the empty cafe space on Main Street, 3 blocks from Doyle's family kitchen. The previous tenant had been a bookstore that couldn't survive the pandemic, but the bones of the space were perfect. Exposed brick walls, large windows facing the street, and an open layout that would be ideal for a casual dining atmosphere. The landlord, an older gentleman named Frank, walked me through the space with obvious enthusiasm. The kitchen equipment is all still here from the previous restaurant tenant, he explained, pointing to the commercial-grade appliances that lined the back wall. Health department approved, just needs a deep cleaning. By 4 p.m., I'd signed a 6-month lease with an option to extend. By 5 p.m., I'd transferred the earnest money from my savings account. By 6 p.m., I was sitting in Bethany's office, watching her sketch logo concepts for Marissa's kitchen. The name had come to me during the drive back from the cafe space. Simple, personal, honest. No family legacy to live up to. No complicated history to navigate. Just me, my vision, and the opportunity to build something entirely my own. The next morning, chaos descended on Doyle's family kitchen like a perfectly orchestrated storm. I arrived at my usual 6 a.m. to find Emily standing in the walk-in cooler, staring at nearly empty shelves with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that Santa Claus wasn't real. "Where's all the food?" she demanded when she saw me. Her voice had a panicked edge that suggested she'd been there for a while, trying to solve this puzzle on her own. "What do you mean?" I asked innocently. though I knew exactly what she meant. The farm deliveries that arrived every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday hadn't come. The specialty ingredient suppliers who provided our unique menu items had stopped their regular deliveries. The bread from the artisan bakery, the locally sourced meats, the seasonal vegetables, all of it had disappeared as if by magic. "The suppliers," Emily said, waving her hands frantically. "They're not answering their phones. The meat delivery didn't come yesterday, and now we're supposed to open for breakfast in 2 hours and we have basically nothing." Carlos emerged from the kitchen, his face grim. "I can probably make something work with what we have in the freezer," he said diplomatically, "but we'll need to run to the grocery store for basics like eggs and milk." Emily looked at him, as if he'd suggested flying to the moon. "Grocery store? But that's not farm to table. That's not our brand." "Our brand," I observed quietly, "was built on specific supplier relationships and operational systems. If those aren't working anymore, then the brand needs to adapt." The irony wasn't lost on me that Emily, who'd spent 2 days talking about changing everything to appeal to younger demographics, was now clinging desperately to the farm-to-table concept she'd seemed ready to abandon for rainbow pancakes. By 8 a.m., when we should have been serving our first breakfast customers, Emily was crying in the office while Carlos attempted to create a menu from whatever ingredients he could find at the corner market. I watched it all with the detached interest of someone observing a scientific experiment. The hypothesis was proving correct. Managing a restaurant required more than good intentions and social media skills. As I reflect on this journey now, I realize that sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing you exactly who they think you are, so you can prove them spectacularly wrong. Emily got her restaurant, but I got something far more valuable: the knowledge that I could build anything I set my mind to, with or without anyone else's permission.